So if you find this sleep story helpful or interesting, then give it a thumbs up, leave any comments that you've got below, and if you aren't already, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you can receive notifications of when future sleep stories go live. I have dozens and dozens of stories already on my channel that you can go and search. I also release new stories every single week, so I hope you enjoy this story.
Okay, so take a moment to close your eyes as you listen to this relaxing, guided sleep meditation. And with your eyes closed, you can hear my voice. And I don't know whether you'll drift asleep faster to the sound of my voice or to the spaces between my words. And as you comfortably drift and relax asleep, I'm just going to tell this story in the background. And this is a story about a woman who was a lecturer in a university, and she lectured about history. And when she was younger, she used to go on adventures with her husband, and the two of them would go on many adventures. And then, as time passed, she started to get older and decided to get into lecturing. And she'd been lecturing for many years now. And her husband had got older and eventually passed away. And she felt now that lecturing was part of honouring his memory, being able to share all their knowledge and wisdom they'd gained from years of exploring. And during summer breaks, she'd go on missions. She'd go exploring different places, often going with her daughter, and they would find new artifacts. They'd gain new knowledge about ancient civilizations, about how the world once was. And she loved that her daughter shared this passion with her. And then one day, while lecturing, the lecture hall that she used was still very old school looking. It was in a really old building that was hundreds of years old, with wooden beams that smelt of old books and had old wooden desks. And behind her while she lectured was a large chalkboard. And one day at the end of class, when the students left the room, she was sat by that chalkboard, and she was looking at a photo of her husband on her desk. And while she was looking at that photo, she noticed sunlight shining in through the window, and that sunlight illuminated some chalk dust in the air. And she noticed how that sunlight, as a cloud obviously passed by outside, moved gently across the chalkboard. And as it did, she could hear the distant sound of someone writing on that board, and writing began to appear. And as the cloud passed the sun outside, and that light moved across the board, she noticed a short sentence appeared on that board, and that sentence was written in her husband's handwriting. And it just said, "It's time for one last adventure." And she knew what that meant, and she looked at that photo of her husband. She picked it up off the desk, held it in her hands on her lap. She wheeled over to the window, gazed out of the classroom window, looking out over the grounds of the university, seeing students outside. She held that picture close and said to herself, one last adventure. She placed the picture face down on her lap, unclipped the back of that picture, and removed an old piece of paper from behind the photo, placing that back on the picture. Wheeled back over to the desk, placed the picture back on the desk, opened up that paper, revealing a map that her and her husband had got many years earlier. And she looked at that map, and it was a torn bit of paper, and she knew she was going to go to that place on that map. It was somewhere she was supposed to go with her husband, but he'd passed away before they'd made that journey. And that night she spoke to her daughter about this adventure she wants to go on, and how she wants her daughter to come with her. And her daughter was keen on this one last adventure. Her mother was saying about how she's beginning to get too old for this, and how being in a wheelchair has made it more tricky for these adventures they've been going on over recent years. So this one will be her last proper adventure. It'll be finding that treasure, finding that thing that her and her husband never had the chance to find. And a few weeks later they set off on the adventure. And they travelled by plane to an island hundreds of miles from anywhere. They then went out on a boat with a crew. And as they went out from that island on that boat, the mother sat there gazing out to sea, hearing the waves against the bottom of the boat, smelling that salty air, thinking about this being their one last adventure. And she talked to her daughter, asking her daughter whether she'll be continuing on, going on adventures, because for years now she seems to have enjoyed these mother and daughter adventures together. And the daughter said that she'll continue going on adventures, she'll continue to show photos and regale her mum with stories of the adventures she goes on. And the mother said that's all she wants, to hear her daughter's tales, to hear the stories of what her daughter gets up to continue learning through her daughter and from her daughter. And the mother has that map on her lap and has a really old compass resting on top of that map, and she's looking down at that compass, watching the needle and keeping an eye on the direction of travel. And as she looks at that compass, so she feels a sense of warmth, of love and connection, and has memories that come to mind of pleasant times, years and years of experiences with her husband, all the adventures they went on, the times they'd spent together, little arguments they'd had over who was right, who gets to make what decision. And this was the last journey they were supposed to make together before he'd unfortunately passed away. And she was so happy that she was making this journey with her daughter, and was aware that she'd put off making this journey because she felt it was supposed to be made with her husband. But now that she's much older, she just feels that she can't keep making these journeys, having these adventures, and that this is the time to make this last adventure. And after a while, as the sun's setting, the boat arrives at its location, many miles off from the island. And the mother and daughter go and get into a submarine. The submarine gets raised up off the deck of the boat, moved over the water, and then lowered down into that water. And as it passes down into the water, so they notice how it begins to rain, and how the sun, low in the sky, is illuminating that rain near the surface of the water, making that rain look almost like little drops of fire as that sunlight catches those raindrops. And as that submarine passes under the water, so they look up. They can see the way that rain is pouring on the water above, making a fuzzy look to the surface of the ocean, and how that ocean is so calm, with long waves just gently rolling by. They notice how the sound changes down here in this submarine. They hear the voice from the boat telling them everything's good to go. They acknowledge this. Then the mother begins the descent down deeper underwater. And as they descend deeper under the water, so the views around them begin to darken. They can see fish and sharks out of the window. And then they descend deeper, and everything gets darker out the window. They start to notice jellyfish, and continue to descend. And the old woman looks at that map, looks at her compass, makes sure they're on track. And the descent takes a while. They lower down deeper and deeper underwater, with just the motor sound of the submarine. And after quite a while, the submarine reaches the bottom of this part of the ocean. And outside the submarine just looks inky black. And they have lights on illuminating the area around the submarine. And they begin to navigate towards a nearby cliff. And there are rumours of a cave being in this cliff. There are legends that once this area was land, and a temple was built into a cliff, and in this temple was a cup, a golden cup, and this golden cup brought peace to the land, that all the different tribal leaders would frequently come and drink from this cup as a show of trust and working together, and then they would go back to their tribes. And for many years these tribes would come together at this temple. They would drink from this cup, and then they'd head off again. And after a while, the submarine reached the cliff face, and looking at the map, and looking at the compass, they worked their way along to where the cave should be, and they could see the cave appearing. The entrance to the cave was larger than the submarine, and so they piloted that submarine into the cave. They could see the light shining on the cave walls. Notice some bubbles rolling along the top of the cave. Noticing crabs and other sea creatures down here that had obviously made this bit of cave their home. And after a while they noticed this cave opening up into a larger chamber. And they could see that the water wasn't touching the cave ceiling anymore, so there must be air higher up. So they raised the submarine up until eventually the top of the submarine broke clear of the water. It was just bobbing on the surface of the water, its bright lights illuminating a vast chamber, and the mother and daughter were both in wetsuits, and the daughter went and opened the hatch in the top of the submarine, and then helped the mother to get to the hatch, and helped the mother up out of the hatch onto the top of the submarine. She then climbed out of the submarine herself, bringing with her a dinghy, which she inflated once out of the submarine. She helped her mother into that dinghy, climbed into the dinghy herself, and then paddled that dinghy across this chamber, shining a torch around the walls, and could see at the far side of this chamber what looked like steps, like this chamber had been filled, but somehow the pressure in this chamber had prevented it fully filling with water, and that the steps appeared to lead from this chamber elsewhere. And once they paddled all the way over to the steps, the daughter climbed out of the dinghy, pulled that dinghy up onto the steps, helped the mother out of that dinghy, and the mother sat on the steps, legs resting in the water. She could feel the coolness of that water, and was thinking about breathing in that air, breathing in air that hasn't been breathed for thousands of years. And the daughter assembled the wheelchair, helped her mother into that chair. And she had a special wheelchair that she used for many of her explorations. The wheelchair had wheels that allowed it to go cross-country, that allowed it to go over obstacles. And although it was a very lightweight wheelchair, the way it managed to go over things made the daughter think of it as being a bit like a tank. That she pushed her mother through forests, she's pushed her mother along beaches, she's pushed her mother up steps, into temples, and the wheelchair has handled it all. And the wheelchair isn't motorised as such, but it does have a small motor that adds a bit of assist when someone's pushing it, but it only does that when needed. So when ascending steps, a person pushing the wheelchair feels like they're pushing it on flat ground, and the motor of the wheelchair just helps to keep it moving forward, to add a bit of extra push to it, and has a setting that prevents it from slipping back, and it has a very low centre of gravity, and then that motor can be recharged. So if they're pushing the wheelchair down some steps, a setting applies some brakes slightly, helps to make sure that it doesn't go too fast. And then any heat from that gets turned into electrical energy, and the kinetic energy of the wheels moving charges the batteries. And the daughter pushes the mother up the steps, and then finds themselves at a door. And this door hasn't been opened for thousands of years. And the mother and daughter decide to toss a coin over who's going to open the door. The daughter had said the mother should, and the mother said the daughter should. So they toss a coin, and the mother wins that coin toss. So the daughter opens the door. And they go in to this chamber, and the torchlight bounces off golden walls, and in the middle of this chamber is a plinth, and on that plinth is that golden cup. And they notice that around the walls are scrolls in many shelves. And they go and they look at some of those scrolls, and they realise these scrolls tell the history of the people of this land. The scrolls talk about solving conflicts, negotiating, working together for the best of the land, while having their own individuality, and the importance of trust with each other. And the mother and daughter take lots of photos of different items, and they both look around this chamber, and as they do, the mother picks up that cup, feels the weight of that golden cup, places it back down where she found it. And as they continue looking around the chamber, the mother stops for a while. She takes a photo out of her pocket of her husband and herself, and she looks at the two of them, and she says to the photo, "We've completed our final mission." And she puts the photo back, and as she does, she notices an area of light appearing in this chamber. And out of that light, she recognises the shape and form of her husband. And although it continues to look a bit like a hologram or an outline of her husband, it begins to walk towards her and kneel down next to her and tell her how proud he is of what she's achieved with their daughter, and that they found their way here, completed this last mission, the mission that was to be the last for the two of them. And she could see that her daughter was still just looking around, and felt that maybe her daughter couldn't see what she could see. And she said how much she missed him, and how she loved their adventures together, and that she'd continued those adventures with her daughter, and has now passed on the baton for her daughter to carry on these adventures, and hopefully have her daughter continue adventures and learning and gathering this knowledge into future generations. And the husband reached over, held the woman's hands, leant in, kissed her on the cheek. Before that light faded, and the husband faded, and the woman looked back at that photo of herself and her husband and smiled, held it close to her chest, then put it back in her pocket. And the daughter and her mother took records of everything here, taking photographs, video footage, measurements, before heading back to that submarine, leaving the cavern, and making the slow ascent back to that boat. And as they rose through the depths, mother and daughter reminisced, spoke about times together, spoke about times as a family over the years, spoke about the future, with the daughter sharing her plans for the future, and the mother just listening, enjoying hearing what that daughter has coming in the future, enjoying hearing the daughter's views and just hearing her voice. And as they reached the surface, so they noticed the rain had stopped and the sky was clear, with a blanket of the most beautiful stars arched overhead. The submarine was lifted out of the water onto the boat. And they shared and talked about what they'd discovered, showing all the images and video on a computer, before heading off to bed. And the old woman, comfortably and relaxed, drifted asleep, dreaming of all the adventures she'd had through her life, dreaming about how she looks forward to hearing many years of adventures from her daughter, in being able to regale some of this in her classes in university, when teaching about history and about the world, and engaging and interesting students, and with a smile and feeling relaxed, she drifted and floated comfortably asleep.